Just wanted to welcome everybody in here on this Veterans Day to Cops and Cons TV, our live show. And that's really what I want to start with, is just to say thank you to all of our veterans out there. I mean, the reason that we have the freedom that we have to have this show, to talk about anything we want, and just to live in a free society is because the people who were brave enough to fight for our freedom. So I want to thank all of the veterans out there, and a lot of different places have, around the country, have free meals and free drinks for veterans, and I hope everyone takes advantage of that. And definitely want to thank all of the local vendors who are doing that to support our veterans. So again, thank you so much for joining us on this Veterans Day, and thank you to the veterans. I also want to point out that we do have a new logo. So we have a new logo for Cops and Cons TV. I think it's pretty awesome. So why don't you put in the chat what you guys think of it, whether you tell us how much you like our new logo. It's going to be up there. I think it's really cool. And again, if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please subscribe to Cops and Cons TV, just so you know when we're going to go live. Again, we typically do live shows on Fridays, usually around lunchtime, 11 or 12 on Fridays. So happy to be here with you today. There is so much to talk about, and this really is the place where we break down the most important issues in policing, where we go over things that are happening and crime stories and what's happening in the world of law and policing. And there's just so much that's happened in the last week that I just can't wait to get to it. So again, want to welcome everyone in. My name is Daniel. If you want to go follow me, please go do so on YouTube and TikTok over at Police Law News. And let's see, is that a super chat? All right, let's see. All right, so we have a super chat from hum along if you can't sing. Happy Friday, legal expert man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the super chat and really appreciate the support there. Thank you again so much. If you have any questions or comments while I'm going through some of these cases and issues, definitely put it in, because part of this isn't just me talking about, these cases. I really am interested in the feedback and what people think are interested. If you think I have a right opinion or a wrong opinion, or if you think that there's something about a story that I'm just missing, put it in the chat. Definitely want to go back and forth and kind of address some of these issues live as we're going through. We do have a couple people who like the logo. NC Esbar says logo job good. So yeah, he likes that. Awesome. Thank you so much. So the first case that I want to talk about, and this case has really died down in the media the last couple weeks, which it's a little bit strange that it did, and it's the Paul Pelosi case. So we don't have to get into all of the facts of what happened, because we've done that before, and I think everyone knows what happened. But the main thing is that Paul Pelosi looks like he's going to make a full recovery. I mean, honestly, what that means for an 82-year-old who was smashed in the head with a hammer, I'm not sure. But it does seem, at least the reports are coming out, that Paul Pelosi is going to make a full recovery, which is good. So, besides being married to Nancy still, it seems like he's doing okay. And some of the things that I want to talk about around that there are just a lot of conspiracy theories around this. And I really just want to kind of go through each one. And really what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of debunk each of these conspiracy theories. Because here's what I think. This comes down to someone who is mentally ill who attacked Paul Pelosi. I'm going to go through some of the conspiracy theories that are out there. And again, please put in the comments if you think I'm right track, wrong track on this. So one of the things that has been, really coming from just like far right-wing media is that there's a criticism that Paul Pelosi, when he was on the phone with 911, that he called this guy a friend. Well, I just want to put it out there. So when Dave DePape broke into the Pelosi house and had contact with Paul Pelosi, he was in there for about 30 minutes before Paul Pelosi was able to call police, or, before Paul Pelosi had an opportunity or did call police. So you have to think about it this way. If you're Paul Pelosi, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you're 82, this guy who broke into your house is 40, there's no one else around, you don't have any other help coming, and you're with this guy in your house for 30 minutes, and he hasn't beaten you, he hasn't harmed you, he hasn't done any physical violence yet, and you finally get the opportunity to get on the phone with police. I think that we all know that even in a best case scenario, it's going to take several minutes for police officers to arrive on scene. So if once Paul Pelosi gets on the phone, if he starts yelling and screaming that, oh my God, a guy broke into my house, he's dangerous, I think he's gonna kill me, and if you start freaking out, you have someone who hasn't harmed you for 30 minutes, You're trying to keep the situation calm. You're trying to keep this person reasonable. So Paul Pelosi freaking out and saying, maybe things that might even be reasonable or true, that you're in fear for your safety, and you start screaming and yelling about a crazy guy in your house. Like, the idea that now you have this person who is obviously mentally unstable, that they are going to do something even in the few minutes, even if police are on the way, it's going to take a few minutes. So I'm just going to put it out there that it isn't unreasonable that in a phone call with 911 that he tried to stay calm, and because he knew that Dave DePape was listening to him, that he wasn't going to say anything to piss off this crazy guy who just broke into his house. So again, I don't think it's unreasonable. I actually think it's the smart move to do to try to keep things calm, but to say things to get police there quickly. So again, him calling David DePape a friend on the phone to 911, I don't think is unreasonable. I don't think that there's anything there when it comes to conspiracy theories. Also, people are criticizing or questioning, and it's okay to ask questions, we should, but let's try to find some reasonable answers, is that on the phone with 911, Paul Pelosi gave the guy's name. So he told 911 that the guy's name was David. And yeah, it's reasonable to say, okay, well, most of the time when someone breaks into your house, you don't know the name of the attacker. You're right, that's correct in most cases, but they were in the house for 30 minutes. David DePape was there for a half hour before Paul Pelosi called police. So is it unreasonable that within that half hour they had some conversation and that Paul Pelosi learned that his first name is David? No, I don't think that that's unreasonable. So the fact that Paul Pelosi gave dispatch or 911 the individual's first name is David, again, that doesn't seem unreasonable. I'm just not seeing a whole lot there. And one of the other things, and I know most of this isn't really conspiracy theory. People don't really believe this, that a lot of this is, more just like right-wing, like jokes on Twitter. But, they're saying that that David DePape was a gay prostitute and Paul Pelosi had ordered him and there was a dispute over money or drugs or something to that effect because that both Mr. DePape and Paul Pelosi were in their underwear. So let's take what we know for sure. And again, we don't know anything for sure because we don't have body camera footage, which I'll get to that later. But at least what's being reported, that both people were in their underwear. Okay, so if that's the evidence that we have, let's unpack that. Let's break that down a little bit. Well, this was 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm not sure how you all sleep, but I can tell you I don't sleep in a suit. I don't sleep in gear like I'm gonna go out skiing. So Paul Pelosi wearing his underwear or being in his underwear at 2 o'clock in the morning, like that doesn't really make any sense. That doesn't make any sense that someone would criticize that. That seems like a reasonable thing for someone to be in while they're sleeping at 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, David DePape being in his underwear, listen, this guy was a nudist, okay? He was like an extremist nudist. And I think we're all lucky, especially Paul Pelosi, that he was wearing any clothes at all. So the fact that both of them are in their underwear, again, it doesn't seem, yes, it's weird, but given the circumstances, it just doesn't seem that unreasonable. Now, there are questions to ask about why certain things happen. And here's the main question I have. So again, the information that we have so far is that once police arrived on scene, that Paul Pelosi, who was standing, somewhere in the home near David DePape, that Paul Pelosi walked to the door, he let police in. At that point, he walked back to where Mr. DePape was, and it's at that point that he was bashed in the head with a hammer. So a reasonable question would be, hang on a second. So someone broke into your house, you called 911, obviously there's at least some fear for your safety there. Anyone would have that. And then the police arrive. Okay, if at any point, I get Paul Pelosi not screaming and yelling and going crazy over the phone with 911 because help could be several minutes away. But now, help was inches away. Help was right there. You open the door, the police officers were there. So at that point, wouldn't it have been reasonable for Paul Pelosi to at least put the police officers in between himself and this guy who broke into the house? Maybe run behind the police officers, walk behind the officers, walk outside. It just seems like to put the police officers in between you and the person who broke in your house seems like a reasonable thing, but for some reason, Paul Pelosi didn't do that. So there are questions about that, and I think that's where a lot of questions have to be answered. And so let's think of, what's the most reasonable expectation for Paul Pelosi? Like, why would he do this? And the most reasonable explanation that I can think of is this. is that Paul Pelosi and Nancy Pelosi, they are very famous people, they're very wealthy, and they've been in the public eye for 40 years. Probably, especially in local San Francisco, literally every time they've gone out to the grocery store, to the movies, to dinner, to a baseball game, they've been harassed and talked to by crazy people. People who have ideas about investments, people who have ideas about public policy, people who love them, people who hate them. Just weird, quirky people who really come up to them and badger them no matter where they are. So this type of person who might be doing this, and again, most of these people aren't violent. I don't remember any other stories of either Nancy or Paul being the victim of violence, yet you know that they are approached constantly by people who might really like them or really not like them. So, it's very possible that Paul Pelosi, that, he's in this house for 30 minutes and David DePape, again, it's weird, and you don't want someone breaking into your house, but he wasn't battered. He wasn't tied up. He wasn't beaten or anything. He essentially wasn't harmed up to that point. So maybe Paul Pelosi put David DePape in the category of some weird guy who comes up to him at a restaurant and just wants to give him a political manifesto that he has written. So because he hadn't been beaten or hurt up to that point, maybe that's why Paul Pelosi didn't have any fear. And now you have police officers there. So maybe Paul Pelosi thinking, okay, police officers weren't here. This guy had 30 minutes to kill me and he didn't. Now we have officers literally feet away. Well, I think I'm pretty safe to walk back into my own house. So maybe that's what he was thinking. And so those are the questions, but that's just my opinion. That's just my thinking about this. We don't know for sure. So I'm curious what other people's opinions are. Oh, okay, let's see. It looks like we have another super chat. Thank you so much from Club of Two. Let's see. She says, I respect your content and love the live streams. I was wondering if you ever trade out patches. I have a couple possible duplicates here in New York State. Club of Two, thank you so much. That is an excellent question. And again, thank you so much for the super chat and thank you for supporting this channel. I really appreciate it. And yes, we would love to accept and trade patches. So if you want to go ahead and send us an email, and we're going to put it in the chat right now. If you want to send us an email, we will give you the pertinent contact information in order to set that up. And I really appreciate that. Again, Club of Two, thank you so much for the super chat and great question. We would love to, again, we have this awesome patch wall, so we would always love to add more to it. Okay, let's see. Janet F says, Capitol Police protects Paul Pelosi's home. She's third in line to the presidency. All cameras are off too. Weird. Janet F, oh, that is an unbelievable question. Thank you so much for bringing that up because I almost missed this part. Yes, so Nancy Pelosi is third in line to be the president, not for long, but for now, she is third in line to be president of the United States. So a reasonable question like Janet F had is that, well, wouldn't it be reasonable to have security around her? Well, the truth is she is. So Nancy, when this happened, was in Washington, D.C. She has 24/7 on-site security. You can't get within 10 feet of her, which is reasonable for anyone in her position, right? It just is. Well, she wasn't there. So, so I guess the question is, well, since the security goes with her. So is it, Paul Pelosi was home alone, so he doesn't have security. I mean, obviously he's a multi-millionaire. He could afford on-site security, and why he isn't paying a retired cop or Happy Veterans Day, a retired military person, 50 or $100 an hour to sit outside his house all night long. I mean, to me, that's crazy when you're worth millions and millions of dollars that you're not going to do that, but he didn't. However, yes, I guess the security that was in place is not only was there a private security monitoring system that they had at the home, but also the Capitol Police have cameras on the home and actually watch the home all day long. In theory, so 24/7, there are cameras on that. But you have to think about it this way. Okay, so how many Congress people are there? 435, and you have 100 senators, plus, governors. I mean, really, we could start talking about all the people that, different dignitaries. If you want to think about all the people that, not just Capitol Police, let's say Capitol Police, maybe there's 1,000 people. I don't know, maybe there's 700. But, but again, if there's 435 different there's 435. There's at least 435 different residences that Capitol Police would have to watch and maintain on camera system. Well, you know, a lot of these Congress people and senators, they have a place in D.C. and they also have a place where they live. If you're like Bernie Sanders, you also have a third lake house. So let's say each of these people have 2 or 3 homes. So not just the physical people, but we could be talking about 1,000 to 1,500 different homes that Capitol Police would have to be watching. Let's say each homes and homes of you know, baby mamas. So, I mean, we could be getting into thousands of different houses and residences. Let's say each residence has 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 cameras on it. So now we're talking about 10,000 cameras. Listen, what Capitol Police simply just doesn't have the ability to appropriately watch and monitor 1,000, 2,000 different residences, 24/7. So that isn't reasonable. I think we all know that now. Let's say there's a breach like there was because David DePape used a hammer to get in. Well, shouldn't there be something in place that, hey, we are watching all these cameras. Maybe we have 2, 3, 4, 10 officers, you know, kind of monitoring 1,000 cameras. I don't know how many there are. I'm just guessing. But let's say, if there is some type of a break-in, if there's a glass break, if there's motion detected on the property, now shouldn't that take what's a normal, you know, in a sea of 1,000 cameras? Shouldn't something like that trigger something like, hey, there's someone that's on this property. We had a motion sensor here. Hey, we had a glass break here. Shouldn't that make some type of alert? I'm not saying it didn't, but there was some system fail, and I think that's where that system definitely failed. So yeah, so I think that's what the most reasonable thing. And thank you, Janet, for the question about security. And again, like I kind of alluded to before, what could really quash all of these conspiracy theories, which I think is what we all want. All we want is honesty. We want honesty and we want to know what really happened, okay? Not just because we want transparency in our government, but like me, I'm extremely nosy. I want to know what happened in these profile cases. We want the body cam footage, okay? I mean, that's mostly what Cops and Cons TV does, is that we do body cam footage, raw body cam footage, and this is the exact kind of footage that we want. And, you know, it's a little bit hypocritical. So think about it this way. If it's a controversial officer-involved shooting, like the Jacob Blake shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin, if it's a controversial officer-involved shooting, we're going to release that body camera footage almost immediately, even if it puts the police officers like in jeopardy of being safe. Even if we know that Ben Crump is going to swoop into town, lie about the video, and then there's going to be riots all around the country, like what happened in the Jacob Blake shooting, even though it was 100% lawful, reasonable, and justified. So those kinds of videos, we're just going to give them, that we're going to give into the mob, and we're going to put those videos out right away. But if it's body cam footage that might embarrass Paul Pelosi, we're not going to put that out. So that's the problem, is that it's not consistent. Because the DA, the San Francisco DA in this case, or in this jurisdiction, said that the body camera footage and the 911 call are not going to be released until after the case is adjudicated, which could take years. Who knows? I mean, this could take years to get all this legal stuff settled out. So when it comes to body camera footage, I'm okay, I don't like it, but I'm okay with living in a world where no body camera footage is released until after the case is truly adjudicated. But that's not what I prefer, but I'm okay if that's always the case. I would prefer transparency in government, and for body camera, I get it has to be redacted. I'm okay with that being redacted, but I would rather have it out quickly. But what I care about more is that it's consistent. I don't want an officer who's involved in an officer-involved shooting treated differently than Paul Pelosi. Either we get the body camera or we don't get the body camera. Have one standard for everyone. Just because you're rich and famous and a politician, or a police officer, you should not get special treatment. That's my opinion on that. I'm curious what everybody else thinks about that. Let's see if we have any comments. And I should point out, so every state, so there are public information, and I've talked about this before, but there are public information laws that kind of go state by state. So California actually has one of the most strict body camera footage public record laws. And a lot of that was instituted by Kamala Harris when she was the Attorney General. That was kind of the policy of her office, where if there's a police incident, it's really difficult to get body camera footage. It's really difficult to get body camera footage for police incidents in California, as opposed to as opposed to other states. States that are really good are Minnesota, New Mexico, Colorado. Texas also has really bad laws. And I mean, just a one fun fact really quick is that Cops and Cons TV has only gotten 2 videos from California, and all the time we've been doing this and trying to get body camera footage from all over the country. So I believe we've requested over 100 different body cameras from California from different cases, and we've actually only gotten 2 back. So some states, you ask them and almost immediately you get the footage within 24 hours. So again, it's not just this case, but just really quick, we have had controversial officer-involved shootings and police misconduct cases from California where body camera footage is released quickly. Again, I just want it to be consistent, not case by case. Either we get the body camera or we don't. If you need to redact sensitive information, redact it, but get us what you can. That's my opinion on that. All right, so that's all I kind of wanted to say about Paul Pelosi. I really appreciate the super chat and the good questions on that again. Because we were talking about Paul Pelosi, it's really important to talk about political violence because a lot of what happened coming up to the midterms is both sides use this Paul Pelosi attack to try to further their side for the midterm elections. But I just want to point out that this political violence, it's not just on one side, it's on both sides. I mean, just think about what happened in 2017. Bernie Sanders supporter who actually worked for the campaign, he attacked and shot 6 different people at a congressional softball game, including Republican Representative Steve Scalise. Also in 2017, Rand Paul, he was attacked and had 6 of his ribs broken by a far leftist neighbor who didn't like his politics. Recently, on October 25th of this year, Don Bolduc, who was running for Senate in New Hampshire, the day he was having a debate, I mean, he literally got to where the debate was with incumbent Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan. He gets to the debate, he's about to walk on the stage, and a crazed lunatic runs up, charges him, and tries to punch him. Now, luckily, Don Bolduc is a retired Army brigadier general, and the police weren't there. The punch was not successful. He only grazed Don Bolduc, but that person was described as a libertarian. So the political violence really comes from all sides. It's all bad, and all of us, no matter who is the victim of the violence, we should all say that it's bad and not accept any of it. And then when we get to, so that's what I wanted to talk about there. I like to talk about Chicago. So I'm originally from Chicago. I lived there until I was 22 years old. And, the city, just in my opinion, has just completely gone downhill. I mean, Chicago is an absolute mess. And Lori Lightfoot is the mayor. And it seems like there's this weird battle going on, to be the worst mayor in America. And, Lori Lightfoot was running behind for a while, behind Garcetti in LA, but I think she's overtaken him. So recently there was a press conference that I really want to talk about, and I think we have a video for a link to it. But essentially, a reporter. So there's a local show in Chicago called Chicago Tonight. Lori Lightfoot. I mean, they have all kinds of political people on there. They're a pretty reasonable show. But Lori Lightfoot went on Chicago Tonight, and she said that 99%. This is a quote. 99% of the criticism that she gets is only because she's a black female. That's it. So, obviously people are like, well, it's possible for us to not like your policies or not like the foot chase policy that you instituted or the fact that Chicago's violent. I mean, we could list 100 different things that we would want to criticize Lori Lightfoot for. That has absolutely nothing to do with her race, her gender, or her sexuality because honestly, most people don't care about that. People in Chicago just want to be able to go and pick up their deep dish pizza and watch reruns of the 85 Bears, okay? No one cares about what her sexuality is, all right? But what Lori Lightfoot did is there was a press conference the next day where a reporter asked her that question. He said, how come, we have all, so this was over the weekend, I should point out that there were over 30 shootings in last weekend in Chicago. And a reporter asked that. He said, hey, last weekend there were 30 shootings in Chicago, yet you went on Chicago Tonight and said the only reason that people criticize you is you're saying it's because of your race and gender. Like, that doesn't make sense. So essentially what she did is she didn't answer the question. She stopped him mid-sentence and she started to personally attack him, saying that he was a former political candidate, that he had political aspirations, and essentially just made it so the criticisms weren't valid. And she pretty much pushed back and she said, well, that's my opinion. I think that's why people are criticizing me. Now, listen, so far in Chicago, as of yesterday when I checked, Chicago has had 590 homicides and also 3 times as many shootings. So listen, there is a lot to complain about and to question besides Lori Lightfoot being a black female. And I just want to say that when politicians do this, no matter what side it's on, I mean, Donald Trump does this kind of too. Like, if you criticize him, like, he can't take any criticism, you know? It's the same thing with Lori Lightfoot. And it's a problem because once you say, if you criticize me or if you question me, that equals racism. That equals sexism. Well, what kind of environment does that create? Do regular, normal reporters, are they more likely or less likely to ask important and probing questions when the criticism of the reporter is that the only reason you're asking that is that you're a racist? So I think it leads to less government transparency when politicians try to put other motives inside of people who are asking questions. It's kind of like Christopher Hitchens said, you know, don't assume that my worst possible motive is my only possible motive, you know? And that's kind of what happened with Lori Lightfoot in Chicago. Again, Chicago, really, they just want to care about Michael Jordan and Ditka and deep dish pizza. And let's see. Peppy Nut says Beetlejuice. Yeah, that's funny. And Ditka. People in Chicago like Ditka. Who would win? Ditka or a tornado named Ditka. And one last thing about Lori Lightfoot that people are pissed off about is she lost the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears, for anyone who cares, is moving from Chicago to the northwest suburbs. So if we should at least be able to criticize Lori Lightfoot on losing the Chicago Bears at Soldier Field. Also, you know, what else could go wrong in Illinois? Governor Pritzker, an Illinois Democrat who was just reelected, he signed a law and supported a law that going into effect in Illinois starting in January of 23, that they did away with cash bail. So, you know, Chicago is one of the most violent cities in the country. So, you know, now it's going to be more difficult to keep people in jail in Illinois who commit violent crimes. So, yeah, what else could go wrong? I think there's a lot of criticism to go around. So just curious to see if anybody has any comments on that. 85 Bears were epic. Greatest team of all time. Absolutely. All right. So I want to get into a recent case that I just really want to talk about. It's from Euclid, Ohio, and this case is just absolutely crazy to me. So a little backstory. So this happened in March of 2017. I said it's recent because there are just some a part of the legal aspect of this just came down. But this happened in March of 2017 in Euclid, Ohio. Police officer Matthew Rhodes, there was an officer-involved shooting where he shot and killed an individual, a 23-year-old named Luke Stewart. And what I want to say about this is the shooting was found to be lawful, justified, reasonable. There were no criminal charges that were fired. The officer is still employed. In fact, he recently got promoted, so congrats, Sergeant Rhodes. But civilly, the officer there was a civil lawsuit against the officer, and the victim's family was just awarded $4.4 million that the officer has to pay himself, which makes no sense. So let me tell you a little bit about how we got here. So this was a call for service in March of 2017. A neighbor called in early in the morning and said, hey, there's a car that's outside my house and it looks suspicious. I don't recognize it. It's been there for a while. The vehicle's running. Can you have police officers go check it out? So Officer Rhodes and another officer did what they're supposed to do. What they have to do. They have to go and check out what's going on. Now, once they get there, they park their police vehicles behind the vehicle. They put their spotlight on and they put their takedown lights on behind the vehicle, and they try to make contact with the individual. They find that there is an individual who appears to be passed out in the front driver's seat of the vehicle. The car's running, the running lights are on, and they look into the car and they see a couple things. They see what looks like a bottle of wine. They can't see the whole bottle. They can only see the top of it, but at least from their perspective, it looks like it's like an open bottle of wine, and they see evidence of of marijuana use as well in the car. So they're thinking, okay, we have, essentially a drunk driver, an impaired driver. Again, so DWI, drunk driving laws are different in every state. So, whether you have to catch someone driving or is just being in a car that's running, is that enough for a DUI? Either way. Either way, like I said, it's reasonable for the police officers to want to make contact with him. Also, because he's passed out, there could be a medical issue there. So once officers get there and you see someone passed out, especially because someone calls, you see the alcohol, so you can't just leave. As a police officer, you really don't have a choice. Not saying you have to detain and arrest anyone in this situation, but you have to make contact. You have a duty to at least make sure that they're okay. And once you make contact with them, if you see signs of impairment, well, yeah, you have to make sure that they're sober to drive, because everybody drives on these roads, right? So this is probably what the police officers, this was what the police officers were thinking. So they knock on the door, he's not opening it, he's not waking up, so they do what most officers do, is they open the door. And they open the door, and what they try to do is they're trying to turn off the car, because the worst case scenario is that the driver starts to take off. That isn't what you want. And a lot of times when you wake up drunk drivers, they're drunk and they're confused and they're not really expecting to be woken up by a police officer. So working as a police officer, the majority of the fights that I had been in was from this exact situation. When you have a drunk person who's in a car, you're waking them up. And I always thought it's just because I was really bad at waking people up, then maybe I needed to take an extra class on that or something. But no, think about it. Someone's drunk and they're tired, they're sleepy, they're not expecting to be woken up, especially by a police officer. A lot of them are so drunk they forget where they're at. They think that they're at home. So there's a lot of confusion, especially in the first couple seconds after a drunk driver woke up. So the idea that they woke up Mr. Stewart while they were trying to turn off the car and that he was combative or fighting with them, like that isn't unreasonable. Well, what Mr. Stewart did is Officer Rhodes, who was on the passenger side, he was kind of in the car trying to turn off the ignition. I mean, you can't turn off the ignition from standing 10 feet away from the car. So he's pretty much in the car. He's leaning over into the car trying to turn it off when this fight with Mr. Stewart started. So Mr. Stewart then, he doesn't comply, he doesn't listen, he doesn't stop. What he does is he starts to drive away with Officer Rhodes pretty much half in the vehicle. Well, Officer Rhodes makes the decision, good decision or not, and we'll get to that in a second. Officer Rhodes makes the decision that it's actually more safe for him to jump completely in the car than to be thrown out of a moving car at that point. So Officer Rhodes jumps in the car. So imagine this situation. This is like a Hollywood movie. Officer Rhodes is in the passenger seat of the car. Mr. Stewart is in the driver's seat and he's driving away. They drive up onto a curb on the sidewalk and they almost hit a telephone pole. They get into a crash. He still isn't stopping. This goes on for about a quarter mile where he's driving 15 to 25 miles an hour. During this, Officer Rhodes is doing what you can imagine a police officer would do. Everything they can to get this guy to stop. So he's punching him in the face. He takes out his taser. Now, because you're not going to get that much of a spread being 2 feet away, obviously the taser was not effective, but he did try to tase him. He was punching him in the face. They were fighting over the ignition, over putting the car in park, but the officer wasn't successful in doing these things. And at some point during this, the officer did take out his firearm and he did shoot and kill Mr. Stewart. So again, this went to the district attorney's office. It was found that it was legal, justified, in a reasonable officer-involved shooting. That's because the way you have to look at this in Graham versus Connor is, and we're going to get to the mistakes the officer made, but essentially, when you're looking at whether or not a shooting is objectively reasonable, because that's the standard. What is objectively reasonable? You essentially put a bracket around the use of force. Okay, let's say there were mistakes that happened before, the officer didn't follow that policy, this policy, all of that, just have to fucking forget that according to the law. And you put a bracket around, bookmarks around just the use of force. And the legal question you have to ask is, in the moment that there was a use of force, was it objectively reasonable? Essentially, would another officer in a similar situation also perceive a deadly threat? If the answer is yes, then it's a lawful, legal, justified shooting. And that's what the court found here. So the court found that, yes, okay, given that the officer was in the passenger seat, he's in a car, he can't control, he's not buckled in, the car had already driven up onto a curb, almost hit a telephone pole, that if this car crashes, that it's very reasonable the officer could go through the windshield and that could be cause very serious injury or death. So the idea that a police officer in that moment uses deadly force to prevent a a likely outcome of death for themselves or a reasonable outcome of death, that's why that one is a legal officer-involved shooting. So what the family did is like they always do, and I don't begrudge anyone for doing this. This is what everyone has the legal right to do. They filed a federal lawsuit for basically a violation of civil rights under our Constitution. And the court said that no, that this was a lawful, reasonable, objectively reasonable officer-involved shooting. So the police officer is protected by qualified immunity. So you cannot sue the police officer this because what he did was objectively reasonable. So the family says, okay, well, how about this? So what they did is, so as again, everybody knows this shouldn't be civics 101, but you know, there is our federal constitution, and then every state has their own state constitution. Now the state constitution can be different than the federal constitution. It absolutely can be different, but it can be different in a way where it can give individual citizens, people, it can give them more rights. So essentially, state constitutions have the ability to be more restrictive for police officers. So, and that's the case in Ohio. The state constitution, when it comes to whether or not a police officer can be sued, and they do have qualified immunity in Ohio as well. However, the standards are lower. I believe the standards in Ohio about whether or not a police officer is going to be able to claim qualified immunity as kind of a shield is, could a reasonable jury look at these facts and circumstances and find that there was a reason to side with the plaintiff. So essentially, so that's more like reasonable suspicion, like ponderance of the evidence, 51%. So if a judge looks at a case and says, I agree, the shooting was objectively reasonable, but can I imagine a situation where a jury might think that it wasn't reasonable by 51%, and the judge said, I mean, really, you know, what the plaintiff said of how this shooting occurred, it meets that very low barrier of preponderance of the evidence. So the officer was sued. He was sued personally, and the jury just awarded the victim's family $3.9 million, and then another $500,000 in, I believe it was pain and suffering. A total of $4.4 million that the officer, the judgment was against him, not the city, not an insurance company, but against that officer personally. And I know that, you know, people who don't like police officers, or even, how about this? Not even people who don't like police officers, people who are like, hey, like I want to live in this world too. Hey, I want to live in a world where police officers have constitutional policing, that they don't violate people's rights, that they're reasonable, and yeah, I want there to be some consequences if police officers don't do that, because I live in that reality, okay? Like that's where I want to be. When my wife and kids are driving around and they get stopped by a police officer, I want the police officer to follow the Constitution and to think, hey, if I fuck up, if I do something bad, there could be some consequences. Like I think we all want to live in this world, okay? But we have to think about it this way. Okay, but is that what happened in this case? I think if we all look at cases like Walter Scott in South Carolina, that just real quick, that's the one where Officer Slager, there was a traffic stop. Walter Scott ran. As he's running away from the police officer, and if this is on video, the police officer pulls out his gun from about 25 feet away, and he shoots Walter Scott as he's running. Then the officer lied about it, and the only way that they were able to find out is that someone was recording cell phone video from a distance that the officer didn't know about. So I guess what I'm saying is a case like that where we say, yeah, that was absolutely a bad officer-involved shooting, not legal, or Derek Chauvin with George Floyd. You know, I don't, if officers like that are hit with these multi-million-dollar lawsuits, no one's gonna lose any sleep. We're all gonna be like, yeah, okay, that officer messed up, and it was pretty bad, and I don't have any sympathy for that cop for doing that. But in this case, where a court has found, but again, that's different than this case, where a court has found that the officer involved shooting, the use of force, was objectively reasonable, okay? So I think I have a little heartache with this, all right? With the officer being forced to pay $4.4 million, because this might be a little secret, police officers don't make that much money. Even though Matthew Rhodes, and again, sir, congratulations, he was just promoted to sergeant, he's still working for that police department. department, but he doesn't have $4.4 million unless he married into money or his family owns Hershey's or something like that. Nobody has no police officers have $4.4 million. Let's look at it this way, okay? A lot of police officers, let's say when you retire, let's say you can retire in your mid-40s, okay? You retire in your mid-40s. Let's say a police pension is approximately $50,000 a year. Could be more, could be less. Let's just say a police pension is $50,000 a year for the rest of your life. Well, let's say you live another 40 years, okay? So that's $2 million. With things going up and cost of living, maybe it's $3 million, okay? And that's if you don't have a divorce. That's if you get your entire police pension, okay? So we have to talk about that. But so let's say so for basically 40 years of a police pension could be somewhere between $2 to $3 million. All right, that's reasonable. And so I mean that's money for this guy was just have to pay $4.4 million for a shooting that's legal. So it's absolutely insane. All right, so now I kind of went through some of the facts. Do I think this officer acted perfectly? No. The officer made some mistakes, and we have to talk about these mistakes. Now, you can say that this is Monday morning quarterbacking, and that's fine, but this is what police officers do. This is what legal experts do, and it's not that I'm criticizing the officer for doing stuff in the moment or saying I could have done it better. Absolutely not, but it's pointing out objectively, hey, this is what the officer did, but what should he have done? If anything, it's hopefully other police officers as part of training can look at this and say, okay, if I'm in a situation, I should do this, I shouldn't do that. Because we don't want this to happen again. A couple things. We don't want people to be shot and killed by police if possible. We absolutely don't want violence between police officers and individuals, and we don't want police officers who really didn't do anything legally wrong to have to pay a judgment of $4.4 million, which is going to put them in financial hardship for the rest of their life, and that's absolutely insane. So what did the officer do wrong and right? Well, a couple things. So what was reported and what was in the court documents, which I went over yesterday, is that the officers put on their spotlight and their takedowns, but they didn't put on their flashing red and blue lights. So the argument or the thing is, well, why wouldn't you put on your flashing red and blue lights? And again, that's because hang on, let me go to Kodak Film here. Kodak, as an active LEO for 15 years, this is one of my biggest fears. And it is one of the biggest reasons nobody wants to be a cop anymore. Who wants to do a job where you can get crucified for doing your job? Kodak Film, you're 100% correct. And that's kind of what I say what happened with the Garrett Rolfe shooting. So just take a little detour. The Garrett Rolfe shooting in Atlanta, when he was involved in the officer-involved shooting during a drunk driving arrest in a Wendy's parking lot, and with Rayshard Brooks. Remember that Rayshard Brooks overpowered two police officers. He then stole the taser of one of the police officers. As he's running away, he turns around, he points the taser at Officer Rolfe. Officer Rolfe, I've gone over this before, so I'm not going to do it now, but obviously in fear for his safety and his life, being tased by someone, so he fired. The DA charged Officer Rolfe, charged him with murder, with homicide for doing that. I don't know how many people here listen or watch Mike the Cop. I do. He's real funny. But Mike the Cop left policing because of this case. Now, there were other reasons why Mike the Cop left policing. He has other business interests, but he's talked about it publicly. Like, this is one of the reasons when he saw this case, and Kodak Film, I think that's a lot of the same thing. We could say, okay, listen, this isn't George Floyd. Like, we can honestly say objectively, I would have done the same thing. This is a legal shooting. This is within training and policy. I would have done the exact same thing, and this officer is charged. Okay, so that's when Kodak Film, when you said that, I immediately think of Garrett Rolfe. Yeah, so if we look at this case, this isn't one of those, again, it isn't one of those cases where, a lot of police officers would have done something different, at least when it comes to the use of force. Okay, but the officer didn't put on his red and blue flashing lights. And part of the reason why this became an issue is kind of like what I said before. So you have someone who you suspect might be drunk. They're not, and they're tired because they're sleeping, drunk and tired, and you're going to have police officers wake them up. Now, I know from experience that people, a lot of times, that ends up in a fight. That's just how it goes. So did those police officers know that? So the argument from the other side, or from the family of Mr. Stewart, is that, yeah, he didn't know that they were police officers. Here he is, kind of drunk, maybe a little high, sleeping. He's woken up by people. There's no red and blue flashing lights. He was confused. Of course he drove off. That's what anyone would do because they didn't know what was going on. So I'm not saying that, and Mr. Stewart is deceased. We can't ask him. But you can see where that would be an error from the police officers to at least not do everything. I mean, it's flipping a switch. one thing over, flipping a switch, turn on the lights. Like, do that. Like, that makes sense, and it's within their policy. He should have done. The other thing is the camera. So these officers were not issued body cameras by the Euclid, Ohio Police Department, which that is a failure of the administration. I've said this before. I think all police officers should carry body cameras, and I think that all not just because we want to show them on here, but I think that all police officers, for protection of themselves, especially because if it's not on body camera, they're automatically, dishonest critics are automatically going to just assume, even if they know it's not true, they're going to put out there publicly that the police officer didn't put on their camera on purpose and try to associate and put bad faith towards that, even if it's just an honest mistake. So, we absolutely need there to be body cameras. Okay, but last I looked, 80% of police officers in the United States do have body cameras. I think that's a good thing. So this officer, Ilyas says, where's the video? I'm getting to that right now, Ilyas. So officers were not issued body cameras, so there just wasn't the opportunity because the cops don't have a body camera there, but they do have dash cams. So the police officer in this case had a dash cam. It wasn't turned on. There were actually two officers on scene, Officer Rhodes and another officer. Neither officer engaged their dash camera, and that appears to be not within policy that they should have. So why they didn't initiate their dash cam, I'm not sure. I think they said that they just forgot to do it. Who knows? Who knows what the culture is there? So there are some police departments where they do random audit checks. Let me just say this, okay? Where there's a culture of if you don't run your body camera and we catch you, we're gonna slam you. Like first time it's a written warning, then you get time off. So when police department, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but when police departments have cultures like that, you know what happens? Police officers don't forget to turn on their cameras. But let's say, and I'm not saying this is the case with Euclid, but if you have a police department go, yeah, turn it on. It's the policy, but no one ever gets disciplined for it. It's just kind of swept under the rug because we know as a cop, you're doing 1,000 things. Yeah, you forgot to hit the button. Okay, we know you're not doing it because you're trying to be a bad guy. So again, I'm not sure what the culture is there, but he didn't turn on his dash cam, so that's a problem. That looks bad as well. He should have turned on the dash cam. Absolutely. Let's see. Okay. Off the Wall Productions. If cops weren't so out of control, all right, no, this wouldn't have been an issue. The issue is the cop should have never been in the vehicle, and if his life isn't in danger, 25 miles an hour, the man should still be alive. Off the Wall Productions, thank you for the comment, and I'm going to agree with some and disagree with some of the other ones, but you are just giving me a great opportunity to do a segue of where I was going next. So the next mistake that the officer made, in my opinion, and within training, is that you don't put any part of your body inside the car. Okay, you don't do it because officers can get dragged by cars. We see how, even just from an officer safety standpoint, we see how dangerous it is that you don't put any part of your body in the car. There was recently a case, I think we did a couple weeks ago, where as the person was trying to drive away, the officer held onto the car, and then sometimes you can get hung up in the seatbelt, where it's like, yeah, that could be, that could lead to an officer-involved shooting, that could lead to the officer getting hurt. Now, obviously, in a situation like this, the first bad decision is the bad guy running from police, okay? So, love your channel. I respect cops, but some are out of control, brother. Yeah, and you know what? Off the wall, so that's why, just real quick, little side note, that's one of the reasons why we do this, is because I mean, there's a lot of people who are out of control. There's nurses especially, and teachers, they're wild. But Off the Wall Productions. One of the reasons that we do this isn't to just say police officers are always right and we always hate police officers, or police officers are always wrong. I mean, I think because again, I'm in this case, I'm even demonstrating the mistakes the officer made. And getting here later, we are going to have another case where I'm going to 100% criticize the police and not say anything good. So stay tuned for that. All right. But what we do is we like to look at a case and say objectively, did the officers follow law, policy? And if they did or they didn't, how do we want police officers to act? What can we do to make sure that police officers police in a more constitutional way? So Off the Wall Productions, I think we should criticize police officers and say how they can do things better. Absolutely 100% that's one of the things that we do. But, okay, so your criticism that the officer, essentially, I think what you're saying is it's officer-induced jeopardy. Hey, the officer stepped in front of a car that was moving 40 miles an hour, and then while he was in front of the car, he started shooting at it, saying his life was in danger. Officer-induced jeopardy, I get it. So yes, police officers are trained to never put any part of their body in inside of a moving car or a car that's going to go away, that's reasonable. And I agree. Now, in a case like this, sir, here's my, I'm Off the Wall Productions. Here's my question, okay? So you have a situation like this where you have a possible drunk driver, okay? And the keys are in the ignition. So what the officer wants to do is, I like to talk about intent, okay? So my wife is in the medical field, and whenever I do something wrong, I always say, well, I didn't do it on purpose. And she goes, well, I don't give a shit. Like, you still did it. Like, she's very black and white. She's a medical person. But me, because I went to law school and have a law degree, everything is gray. Everything is, well, what's the intent, I want to know the intent behind something. Like, to me, that plays such a big part of it. So what was the intent of the officer? Did the officer reach his hand into the car because he was trying to do something nefarious or trying to do something good? Well, what the officer was trying to do was turn off the car. So let's take that to its end. If the officer turns off the car successfully and gets the keys out of the ignition, is this whole situation avoided? Yes. So yes, where I would say, so like I said, in a situation like this, let's say the officer doesn't try to turn off the car and, there's a fight at the door when they wake him up. Not saying you Off the Wall, but a lot of other people, what they are going to say is that, why didn't the officer, so you woke up this guy. So here we have a guy who's drunk, high, and tired. He's probably going to fight and try to run. And instead of trying to turn off the car, you just woke him up all crazy because you out of control, crazy police officers are looking for a fight. So what I'm saying Off the Wall is that, we have the benefits of looking at something, from 2020 hindsight, where in the moment the police officers don't. And yes, where you typically shouldn't, when someone is awake and they're talking to you and you see they're about to drive away, in situations like that, officers should never try to grab onto the car or grab onto the person. That's against training, that's dumb. But in a situation, and dangerous, but in a situation like this, when the person is still sleeping and your intent is, okay, if I can get the keys out of the ignition, I can actually make this whole situation safer to anyone, like that isn't unreasonable, okay? Let's see, I think he was trying to do the right thing, but he should have got away from the car as soon as it started to move. Okay, I agree with you there. Okay, so was it even possible? So now we have to think about it like this. Okay, so at what point did the car started to move? Now imagine being in a car, and I know maybe we don't think 15 to 25 miles an hour is fast. Listen, this isn't like the big Lebowski where Walter can roll out of a car at 40 miles an hour with an Uzi and be totally okay. This isn't the case. If you're in a car going 15 miles an hour and you jump out or get thrown out, you're looking at serious injuries, maybe death. If your head hits the wrong way at 15 miles an hour, you're probably gonna die or have serious injuries. So again, we can just say 15 miles an hour isn't fast. But listen, I've been in bike crashes where I'm probably going 15 miles an hour, and it's been rough. So okay, as everyone knows here, I broke my nose a couple weeks ago while I was running, and I tripped and I smashed and I fell, and I was probably only running, I don't know, how fast do people run? 7 miles an hour? I don't even know, unless you're Michael Scott, who ran, I think, 37, 38 miles an hour. But it's one of those things where it isn't unreasonable. It is. Jeremy DeWitt is a big fan of the channel. Thank you, Jeremy. Jay, you are welcome here as a guest here anytime. Okay. All right. Let's see. So it isn't unreasonable, but yes. And Jeremy is out of prison. Yes, he absolutely is. So it's not unreasonable in this specific situation that the officer reached in. I get what he was trying to do. Now, once you're in that situation, the officer made the choice to get in instead of completely getting out. Was the right situation? I don't know. If Mr. Stewart in the car started to kind of like creep forward at 1 mile an hour, in that moment, I would say the officer should jump out of the car. But what if, he just slammed on the gas and it was quick? And it was quick and it was unexpected. In a situation like that, you might just say, holy shit, I'm just gonna stay in the car. It's really difficult. I don't really know. Jeremy DeWitt's at the Holiday Inn Express. That's hilarious. Thank you, Jeremy. So I want to talk about that case. But again, one of the main things about that is that, at least in the court's eyes, it was viewed as a legal shooting, but the officer was still sued. The jury found against the officer. He's going to have to pay $4.4 million. I don't know if that can be appealed. I don't know that much about Ohio law because I don't live in Ohio. But hopefully we'll see if that can be appealed or mitigated, or maybe the police department can help the officer out. I'm not really sure what to do. He is still employed. Officer Sergeant Rose, hopefully you do not have to pay that, but it's not looking great. And that's just the thing to talk about, when it comes to qualified immunity. There's qualified immunity for feds and there's qualified immunity for states. And really what, Democrat politicians and, people who are far left or just even on the left, what they've been trying to do is that they're kind of like, okay, this qualified immunity on the federal level probably isn't going anywhere, but qualified immunity on the state level, this is where the fight is. And that's what they've been doing in a lot of states. In Colorado and in New Mexico, they've done the same thing. So watch out for that. Let's see. So the next case that I want to talk about, okay, so, all right. I did say I was going to off the wall. I did say that I'm going to talk about a case where I'm going to criticize the police officers, and I think we have a video for this one as well that we'll put in the chat, but this is a case where I am going to criticize the police officers. So I don't know how many people watch First Amendment auditor videos, but I absolutely love it. I watch Amagansett Press and Long Island Audits. I love those channels. I actually think that those two channels do a really good job of being honest. Johnny 5-0, he's been on a couple of my lives a couple times. I think Johnny's an interesting guy. I do like his work. He's entertaining. He's a little more aggressive than I would prefer. With police officers for really no reason at all. But those are some of the channels that I watched. So this has ended up on a lot of First Amendment auditor channels, but it wasn't supposed to go that way. Okay, so this happened, and you might have seen the video because it's been out there. This happened in Florida where there was a call for service where an individual was walking down the street. It's like a 65-year-old man, and someone called in and said, hey, I think this guy has a weapon. So this guy, in his back pocket, there is kind of a bulge, and there's something sticking out of the back pocket of his pants. So as the guy is walking down the street, a police officer in Florida stops him and says, "Hey, what's in your what's in your pocket?" And he said it's a navigational aid, which is essentially a walking stick because the guy's legally blind. So it's one of those walking sticks that can fold up and it goes into your pocket. So, the police officer, stops him and asks him what was in his pocket. He said, it's a navigational aid. And at that point, he says it's a walking stick. Okay, so right there, that should be the end of it. Okay, even if we think that the police officers had reasonable suspicion based on someone saying that there's a bulge or that the guy could have a weapon, the officers get there and they see a bulge or could be a weapon, is that enough for reasonable suspicion? Maybe. Reasonable suspicion is such a low bar. Let's just say it is. Okay, even if officers had a reasonable suspicion to stop him at that point, once he says it's a navigational aid and he actually took it out and he showed the officer, there's no more reasonable suspicion. That's it. It's over. Police officers cannot detain. They cannot ask for ID. That's it. The contact is over. However, once the guy showed the police officer was that the officer said, "Hey, what's your name and date of birth?" And the man responded, "What are you, some kind of tyrant?" And the female police officer in terrible fashion said, "Yeah, I am." I mean, it was tongue-in-cheek and it was kind of joking, but, he said something kind of rude and she said something totally legal. It's completely legal and for him to say, "What are you, a tyrant?" But she responded in kind, which really only makes her look bad, not him look bad. So, and then she asked for his ID again. He basically says no. And he quotes the law. He says, he said, "I don't have to show you my ID. It's a walking stick." He says, in order to detain me or ask for my ID, you have to have reasonable suspicion that you can articulate. And he specifically says this in a very articulated way, so he knows the law. And he says, "What's your suspicion?" Reasonable question. And she just says, and she goes back to, "Well, we got a call that you were armed." And again, he says, "Yeah, well, look, it's a walking stick. You can see it's a walking stick. It's not a weapon." So at that point, they get into a pissing match back and forth. This guy, you know what? I'm going to give it to him. He holds his ground. He doesn't give the police officer the name and ID, which I don't like how this case ends, but yeah, I mean, he didn't have to. And I'm never going to criticize someone for standing up for their rights. So he did the right thing. He was legally correct, okay? Not the police officer. Eventually, he asked for a sergeant, which is fine to do. The sergeant gets there, and the sergeant somehow seems to know less than the police officer because the sergeant then kind of asked the officer, "Well, hey, why was this a call for service, and she starts to talk. And then the guy jumps in. He says, it's because of this walking stick. So then the sergeant says, yeah, well, she was called because of someone thought you were armed. And the blind guy just goes, yeah, it's this walking stick. And he says, it's almost like he can't believe how dumb the police officers are being right now. And he basically says that the sergeant again asks for his ID. He refuses. So then he says, I want your ID. As soon as he says that he wants the name and badge numbers of the police officers, as soon as he asks for the name and badge of the police officers, the tone changes and they place him under arrest. They place him under arrest for resisting arrest. Now in Florida, resisting arrest, the statute is so broad that it really is just way too broad of a statute, because almost anything can be considered resisting arrest. But typically, most states, even if it's not state law, most good, reasonable police departments have policies that say, hey, officers, you can't arrest someone just for resisting arrest, meaning you have to have an underlying charge. Meaning you can't have someone walking down the street doing something completely legal. You go to stop them, they refuse, and then, you tell them they're under arrest, not for a lawful reason, and then you charge them with resisting arrest. You have to have an underlying crime. Disorderly conduct, domestic violence, DWI. If there's not an underlying charge, then you cannot charge someone with just resisting arrest. Again, that is how most state laws are written, and even if it's not, that is how most police departments have policy to kind of fill that in, because that is reasonable. Again, we want police to be constitutional. So the other individual was arrested, and he was actually arrested. He went to jail for this. It's absolutely insane. It's been all over the internet, and here's the thing. Cases like this should be on the internet. Now, am I going to say that this police officer is a bad person? Did she wake up in the morning and say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go and violate the first blind 65-year-old white guy I see and violate his rights for absolutely no reason? No, of course that's not what she was thinking. She wasn't trying to do anything bad, but she did something wrong. She was incorrect. So is it a problem with training? Is it a problem with education? I really don't know. And one of the things you have to look at if you're in this department or an admin or IA, you have to look, okay, has this officer had these problems before? Maybe this is the first time this officer ever had that. Maybe the police department hasn't had legal updates in 3 years. Our police department, now this wasn't a First Amendment auditor case, but the arguments that he makes are reasonable and are literally the arguments that First Amendment auditors make. Like, what's your reasonable suspicion? Again, good question, because officers have to have that. So it's one of those things where, our police department's giving courses on how to deal with First Amendment auditors, because if they were, the content of that kind of a course would be exactly what would have benefited this officer, because again, my guess is she didn't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to violate the rights of the first blind guy I see because I'm pissed off today. No, obviously that's not what she was thinking. She just didn't know. She was incorrect about the law. And yeah, this guy's going to sue. He's going to win. And he absolutely 100% should be compensated for this, because no one should be arrested for ridiculous shit. And this guy absolutely was. So again, we put the link in the video on there. So let us know. Let us know what you think about this. Let's see if we have any questions. Tony Destro, for all the police that think he shouldn't have got sued, they can do a GoFundMe for the $4 million and cover him. Okay, thank you, Tony. That's for the last case that we saw. And I haven't seen GoFundMes be successful for police officers for civil things. However, I have seen GoFundMes where police officers are charged criminally, and they're looking at, because lawyers are ridiculous, where there's a GoFundMe for the best example I can give is Officer Christopher Schur, who killed Patrick Loyola in what I think is a reasonable, lawful, justified officer-involved shooting, but he's charged for it. We're going to cover that case the more it goes. So there have been GoFundMes for legal defense, and what's interesting is sometimes GoFundMe actually shuts those down. There's political pressure to shut those down. So kind of like with body cameras, like if it's against police, we're just going to err on the side of that, even if it's bad for individual police officers. But yeah, GoFundMe shuts down a lot of those fundraisers for police officers, for criminal defenses, even in cases where you think that they probably did the right thing. All right, so the last case, then I have a funny story. So stick around. Last case and then a funny story. Last case, and since we just did a story about criticizing police officers, we're going to go the other way, and I'm going to highlight a case, and we actually have a link for this as well. We're going to highlight a case of police officers doing the right thing and actually saving a whole lot of fucking lives. So this goes back to Albuquerque, New Mexico last week. Here's what happened. Last week in Albuquerque, New Mexico, the Phoenix Police Department got a tip from an individual who lives in Phoenix. And here's what they told Phoenix Police. They said, hey, my sister and her 2 young kids, they came across the border illegally from Mexico. And I paid $30,000 in order for them to do that. Now, the smugglers, the human traffickers, have these people in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And instead of releasing them to the agreed upon $30,000, they're demanding another $6,000. I don't have it. I've talked to them on the phone. They're alive. They're okay. But essentially, they're being kidnapped. They're being held hostage, and they're not being released. And again, like, we didn't agree to pay the $6,000. We paid them what they want. We think they're in danger. So Phoenix Police, this is an example. Now, the local police and feds don't always work well together. Got to be hats off to all 3 agencies. Homeland Security, Phoenix Police, and Albuquerque Police Department did an unbelievable job of working together on this case. So Phoenix Police contacted Albuquerque Police. Albuquerque Police got Homeland Security involved, or Phoenix Police got Homeland Security involved. Either way, all 3 agencies, what they were able to do by working together is they set up a sting operation where they sent in an undercover and I believe also Moriarty Police Department and Torrance County Sheriff's Office in New Mexico. Want to give a shout out to them as well, because I think they also helped tremendously in this. A great collaboration between multiple different police agencies. So again, hats off there. Okay, so to get back to the story, it's Homeland Security, with the help of these police departments, was able to set up an undercover sting. And again, this is something from like a movie. An undercover sting in the ruse of, yeah, hey, we're going to have someone meet you to pay this $6,000, to meet you to pay. So they did that. So Homeland Security sent an Homeland Security or Homeland Security sent an investigator undercover, and they arranged this meetup. At that point, the smuggler, I believe it was 2 smugglers. I think it was a male and a female. Could be wrong about that, but either way, the offenders were arrested. Local police were able to go to the house. Now, when they went to the house to where these people were being held, it wasn't just the mother and the 2 little kids. So there were actually 4 smugglers. So I want to be accurate on this. It was four people were charged, 2 smugglers, and then 2 people they had as like guards who were like security for the human traffickers. So there were 4 people arrested. When local police went to the house, they didn't just find the mother and the 2 kids. They found over 50 people. 50 migrants who were being held against their will. So police officers were able to obviously intervene, arrested the bad guys, and were able to save all of those people. And I just want to say that, cases like this, I know that this is what police officers are supposed to do. But you have to think about it like this. It wasn't that long ago. In June of this year, in San Antonio, Texas, I think 53 people, migrants, were in the back of a tractor-trailer truck and were just left there and died. Essentially, they were cooked to death. So you never know what was going to happen with these 53 people who police saved, but it never got to that point to where they were trafficked even further and maybe put in a position where they could have been seriously hurt or injured. So again, we did a police story that was, I criticized the cops. Now this was a story where the police officers did the right thing and they actually saved a lot of people. Okay, so and I said I'm going to end this with a funny story. I think this is a funny story. And in a second, we're going to put up a photo on the screen. So this is Lake County, Ohio on Halloween. So the Lake County Sheriff's Police Department had an idea that they really wanted to get the community involved. They really wanted to do something nice for the community. They wanted to do something nice for the community, and they wanted to put their horse-mounted unit to walk around during Halloween while kids and families were trick-or-treating. And you know what? They wanted the horses to really get in on this. They wanted to dress up the horses. So they did. So I don't know if you can see on the screen, but they essentially dressed up the horses as ghosts. They put sheets on them, they cut out eye holes, and they walked around like this. Now, I think you know where this is going. There was criticism that, hey, that's great, but these actually look like KKK horses. Jeremiah Osborne, so they claimed up, yeah. So this picture looks bad, right? But apparently at night, while they were walking around, because Halloween happens at Halloween doesn't happen at night. Trick or treating happens at night. Is the horses actually had like orange necklaces on that were like lit up and glowing with like orange pumpkins. So I think in reality it didn't look as bad as that picture that we just showed, because what we're getting from this and all the reporting is that in the moment on Halloween, no one complained. No one said anything. No one called into complaint dispatch. And, no one complained. No one had any issues with it. So again, that's a terrible picture. But I think in the moment, it probably didn't look that bad because of the orange pumpkin lights and stuff like that. But anyways, and we know that there were no complaints the day of, because the day after, the sheriff's department put a bunch of these pictures just like this, put these pictures on the internet. So on their social media page. So again, if there were complaints about it the day of, they never would have put it on social media. So obviously by the next day, they still had no idea. No one had called or no one had texted or did anything that police departments get communication with the public. Anyways, so the next day it came out, put on social media, and it's blown up. It's gone viral. It's gone everywhere. But they actually do look like KKK horses. Now, obviously that wasn't the intent. That's not what they were trying to do. But yeah, it does look like that. So yeah, I wanted to put that out there. Let's see, Off the Wall Productions. Yes, that's great. I live in a small town in Michigan. Our cops are awesome, and my son is best friends with the chief. Awesome. He wants to be a cop. Let's see, Jeremiah Osborne. Ghosts don't wear pointy hoods and carry burning crosses. That's true. So the horses were absolutely dressed up as the horses were dressed up as ghosts, but people didn't like it afterwards. All right, that's going to be the end of our show. Again, happy Veterans Day. I really want to put out our appreciation out there for all the veterans out there. The reason that we're free and able to do anything that we do is because of the people who are brave enough and willing enough to fight for our freedom out there. So I also want to say that, in all the research we've done, it looks like about 19% of active police officers are veterans as well. So there's a lot of crossover between the police and the military community. So I want everyone to have a great weekend, and please be safe out there. Again, happy Veterans Day.